Welcome back to the 7th season of my podcast. I'm making a couple of changes for 2024, namely moving episodes to fortnightly to create a more realistic workload and publishing on Thursdays. You probably know by now that I work with companies to help them understand what's getting in the way of people having the best experience and performing well. Whether that's about work culture, leadership and management, mental wellbeing or engagement, I strip back the noise to uncover what's really going on. And then together we create a meaningful, innovative and sustainable approach to address those challenges. And that's what I'll be discussing with my guests. It's all about putting the human factor back into business, because when we get people right, we get business right. I want to give a quick shout out about Leadership and Manager Labs, because I'm facilitating those with the fabulous Gemma Ellison of Heart Leadership. If you're interested in a space and community dedicated to development via a process of experimentation that gives us permission to analyse, test, review and learn, all within a human-centric framework, get in touch. Details are in the show notes. I'm your host, Lisa, psychologist and psychotherapist and founder of It's Time for Change. Thank you for joining me on Beyond the Water Cooler. So I'm joined today by Rob Day. Rob is chairman and founder of Blueprint Interiors, which is a leading innovator in workplace design and dedicated to building environments that inspire creativity, collaboration and employee wellbeing, which ticks a lot of my boxes. So welcome, Rob.
Thank you, Lisa. Good to see you today.
So I've invited you to be my guest today because I was inspired by your invitation, actually, to join you and Montfort University and Steelcase in February at an event, which you'll tell us about later. We're going to be diving into the convergence of interior design, wellbeing, and innovative workplace strategies. And I love that because to me, that just pulls together so many different aspects of work and the workplace. And you are super passionate about connecting the physical environment that we're in with leadership and culture, wellbeing, and all the stuff that I'm super passionate about. So tell us, Rob, a little bit more about Blueprint Interiors and what makes you different to other interior designers and office furniture people out there.
Okay, well, thank you, Lisa. Yeah. So we've been established 23 years, and I suppose when I started, having done a similar thing for various other people over the previous 10, 15 years, and earlier than that within the hotel and leisure environment. The business, arguably, you could describe us as a design and fit out company. So interior design certainly, and then the project management and providing complete service for furniture and contracting to deliver a turnkey operation. So it's quite interesting how that market has developed over the years. It's relatively easy to get to quite a big number in terms of being a 2, 3, 4 person company. So we quite quickly hit £1 million turnover and did some reasonable sized projects. But it's interesting. We found ourselves in a market with dozens and dozens of other people within a 20-mile radius. You might find at least half a dozen other companies who would be similar size, shape, and so on. And obviously, competitively, you're always trying to distinguish yourself. I suppose, arguably, when it was just me and a couple of people supporting us, you rely largely on your personality or character. I prefer to use the phrase, but you rely on that to distinguish you from competitors. And many people have built businesses that reach that sort of level of turnover, that sort of size and scale, and done it very successfully. And it's almost entirely built on relationships, basically. So a little less than 23 years ago, I started thinking about the end game and where starting in business would lead me to. I started it for 2 very distinct reasons, interestingly. One was, as a human givens specialist, you'll appreciate this. One was control over my own destiny. So I just turned 41, I think. And I felt quite vulnerable in the existing position. I worked for a small family business, but they were having all sorts of interesting personal issues. And I was thinking, well, if you can do that, if they can do that to each other, I come a long way down their list ultimately, as a valued employee, but nonetheless an employee. The second one was financial independence. Most of us go to work primarily to earn money. Obviously, we hope we will enjoy it at the same time as well. But arguably, those are the two principal reasons I went and did it. So when I thought about how do I conclude this successfully at some point, at what point do I stop? What I'd learned already was how important it is to build a team to deliver really quite sophisticated solutions and complex solutions. It isn't rocket science, but it is complicated, and you need people to do that. And you realize that the more people you bring on board, the more you can focus on the bits you're good at as a leader. So I'll come on to leadership in a little while. I think the thing that really struck home to me was my clients are asking me the wrong questions. They think this is the issue. Actually, I'm not sure it is. That's actually the wrong issue. That process has become more and more sophisticated over the last 10 years in particular, I think, where we realized we were doing something different, but we couldn't actually describe it properly. And that's truthfully when an understanding of human givens, which is a very personal experience for me, but once I'd understood that and sort of realized there are some fundamental universal truths behind human givens. Once I'd realized those, I very quickly realized that you could apply those to all sorts of things. Certainly my work, but literally almost everything in life. There were these needs that had to be met, and how you went about doing that and how you explained it to people. It's also partly to do with my journey in leadership and growth in my understanding of what makes a good leader. And God knows I've made some mistakes, but as you move through that process, you just get better at it. So yeah, that was.
What can I ask you, Rob? When you realised that your clients were asking you the wrong questions, what were they asking you, and what do you think they should have been asking you?
Well, sometimes they were literally saying, sometimes it was, well, our brand colours involve blue and red, so it has to be that colour. And it was very sort of institutional and corporate, I suppose, their response. What I realise now, that's how I would describe it now. They were thinking about what the company needed, their perception of what their business needed. And they were thinking in quite sort of one-dimensional ways, quite straight lines in many respects. They would sometimes provide me with a sketch drawer, almost never to scale, which is fascinating when you see somebody draw a room and 20 chairs in there, and you try and then explain that the room is 12 foot square, and that won't work. But they would have a lot of preconceived ideas about what they'd done and how they could improve things, and that's all good stuff. But we were sort of saying, well, we get to the point where we were confident enough to say, well, look, we're the designers. Can you tell us what your challenges you're finding? And that's really what's grown massively and has been informed by human givens, because the way we ask questions and understood and interpreted what clients were telling us has evolved massively as well. Because when they said, oh, we're struggling to get people into this area, we're struggling to get people to concentrate, or productivity is not good in this space, they already thought they knew what the answer was, and actually it was probably something very different. It's like, your back aches, but actually what's wrong is you've got something wrong with your foot, which is causing your whole gait. Do you know what I mean? It's the core of the problem often lies almost parallel to the perceived problem sometimes. So that was a very significant issue. I used to have a lot of clients tell me, as I wrote our first brochure I produced, some of the phrases I've been asked to answer, questions I've been asked to answer. What does good look like? So that's a great question. We're lucky, actually, in so many ways. We have something very tangible at the end of our exercise with our clients. They can, well, not just look at it and touch it; they feel it and they live in it. It's a fantastically rewarding industry to be in that respect. But they would say, "Oh, what does good look like?" Because there weren't many examples of what good looks like. And I've in the sort of 35, 40 odd years I've been involved in interior fit outs, whether it's hotels and leisure or whether it's been offices, which it has been for the last 30 odd. I've been to some amazing looking places, but what I realized subsequently was that they didn't necessarily work just because it looked great. It's quite interesting as well, because I'm interested in architecture as an amateur. I'm not an architect, but I love architecture and the feeling of being moved by physical space. And we would all recognize the kind of sort of statuesque and imposing. I'm going to use the word institutional in a positive way here, which I don't often do. But the idea, things like a church. So I was in Barcelona last year, went and had a look at the Sagrada Familia in a very advanced stage of completion now for the bits they've started. And I defy anybody not to be emotionally and actually physically affected by the experience of being in a place that's just been so cleverly designed and constructed. Now, I'm not saying we produce the workplace equivalent to the Sagrada Familia on a regular basis. I would be very, very happy if we did that. But it's recognizing that the built environment does have an impact on you, and it can be absolutely positive. It can be designed to invoke certain thoughts and feelings. In particular, churches and typical institutional buildings. Military is a really interesting arena to consider. But these things have a very specific purpose to make you think and feel in a certain way. So it doesn't, sort of great leap then to realize that within the workplace, if you're being told to think that you're part of XYZ corporation and everything's red and blue, and the word I'll use for the first time today here is culture. The culture in the business is that you conform. Historically, we'll talk about process and so on now, but the vast majority of employees in any large organization, or any organization above half a dozen or so, are involved in process delivery. And they tend to be very institutional environments. Sort of hopping about a bit here, but you'll hear me use the phrase, open plan offices with rows of desks, and I offer the visualization that those employees are like factory farm chickens pecking away at the keyboards, and we all know how rough and unhappy factory farm chickens look compared to the free range examples. So I offer that as a very very polarized choice, really.
I was in a client yesterday in their office, and we had a meeting in their meeting room, and their room was not amazingly designed, but there were simple things in there, like just really nice bookcases on the end wall with just covered in books and all sorts of different things, and some use of color in there. And actually, I commented to the person who was leading the meeting, it just made a refreshing change going into a bland environment where
with some art on the wall,
and you just to feel at ease and to feel
well, yeah. I mean, I think you're actually touching upon one of the very core principles here, which is, I've just referred to large corporations and employees engaging in process delivery, and the management of those processes and those people tends to be quite close. We tend to end up with micromanagement, lots of structure, lots of layers of management, lots of supervisory levels, and it's easier for the organization if everybody conforms, so that if a piece breaks, you can replace it easily, to be really blunt about it. If you don't generate a great deal of loyalty, and people in your delivering your process tend to move out at the drop of a hat. I've done some very large call centers, for example, back in the day. I'm not really proud of them now, looking back on it in hindsight, but people would move for 20 pence an hour pay rise, or the fact there was a PlayStation in the cafe. There was literally a transaction. So if you want to move people, if you want to motivate people, if you want to affect people, using the built environment is a very powerful way of doing it, either in a very positive way or indeed in a very negative way.
And many people don't get that the strength of that connection, do they, between performance and their office environment?
We put up with a lot, don't we? I mean, every time we go out into the public domain, whether it's a walk to the shops or to a supermarket or to any brand of high street shop, or we go to any pub or restaurant, or we go to any workplace, we're living in somebody else's idea of what good looks like, basically, what they think they're trying to achieve by doing that. I mean, another major dynamic I talk about at the moment, quite apart from the changing nature of work itself and the fact that process is being removed, is the other huge thing is, consider 40 years or so of home ownership, private home ownership, or at least much more control. People have much more control of their home environment. So we all watch loads of programs about DIY, Chateau in France, cookery programs, all these lifestyle programs which support this vision of what we think good looks like. And in fact, if I always say to somebody, what proportion of your personal wealth, time and money, and brain power do you apply to creating a comfortable environment for yourself, primarily at home, of course? And the answer is it's changed massively over 40 years, hugely so. And that also answers one of the questions which I got asked by quite a notable law firm the other day, where they said, actually, don't have any problem getting our juniors back. It's the senior partners, of course, who are really resistant to coming back to the office. And, yeah, but they probably live in, without stereotyping too much, they probably live in sort of £1 million house with extremely comfortable lifestyle, and they've invested huge amounts of time, effort, personal wealth in creating an environment they love. If they then get planted back into a highly institutional environment, they may not enjoy having an office, and seeing the workers outside, or indeed alternatively they might not enjoy being planted out in open plan, as so many companies have done. They've implemented this everybody's open plan, with a knife and fork, quite honestly. They're not quite sure. Well, the reason they've done it is to save money on space. Arguably, there can't really be any other sound.
Yeah, and I think reason. You've made a couple of comments about what does good look like, and what we experience as someone else's version of what good looks like. A lot of people don't give what good looks like a thought, and whether that's about their physical environment or how they engage with their role or with their colleagues, or whatever it is, we tend to just operate on those patterns of expectation. And this is just what we believe work is about. This is what we believe.
Certain cultural, absolutely, certain cultural norms are in place. So, I do a lot of work in schools, and people's, listening to a 12, 13-year-old's perception of what the first day at work might look like, and then actually offering that to them and delivering them and seeing what they think, or certainly what my version of what an office looks like. It's quite a shock. It's quite a shock for them. We do have these cultural norms that we adhere to. I mean, essentially, I suppose the root of it for me is that we are vastly institutionalized, whether we care to admit it or not. We have certain patterns of behavior that are imposed, society and community, but workplace is also, it's a society, it's a community. There are inherent rules that people obey, and if you don't do anything about them, then they will just go, continue. You see many organizations this sort of stasis, don't you? This kind of, well, we've always done it that way. Why would you change it? A lot of people are very resistant to change because we all know how much people enjoy control and stability and security. These are critical features of fundamental human needs, but at the same time, they're not necessarily conducive to really healthy experience. And I think change is good. Change is always good. It always offers lessons, experiences, mental and physical fitness components to it, and it does exactly the same for business. If everything stayed the same forever, business would be very dull, and life in general would be very dull. So we actively embrace change, and I suppose arguably when we talk to many of our clients, and we do a lot of stuff through a workshop process, where we do it from the senior leadership first to get the buy-in and the vision and the compliance, as it were, the encouragement at senior sort of they need to get the intellectual buy-in and back it up with proper resources. But we will take it down through layers of management as we see them, as we understand them, to try and deliver it to people who, some of them come along incredibly negative. That they will be deeply cynical about another office change. And we actually say to clients now, bring us your most awkward, intransigent, stuck in the mud types, as it were, because they're the ones who have been the greatest advocates subsequently. The actual process of the change is what they've really enjoyed, in fact. And that's another big subject we can talk about. But they've got it. There's no question. They go, I understand. I'm not being told what to do. I'm being asked to do this, but actually I'm being asked to contribute, to give the benefit of my experience as a person in the company, in the process, and say, this works for me. Otherwise, actually, this bit's really hard. And I've got a great challenge with my marketing people at the moment, because I've got this, sort of quite a visual thinker, and I've just got this thing that, for so many people, the average day in the workplace, starting with getting up, sorting the kids out, doing the commute, getting into the office, think of it as a physical assault course, literally a physical assault course. And all of a sudden, you just realize it's almost funny then, isn't it? When you go, what else could my company do to interfere with my chances of success today? Oh, great, there's no car parking space. Oh, fantastic, the desk booking system's broken. Oh, great, I'm sitting next to them today. You know, all these things that, you know, when you think about it in that respect, you can laugh about it, but it's deadly serious. You know, if most of us, most business leaders would agree that their people are the economic units that deliver success. Well, yeah, it's like anything else, isn't it? You know, if you believe and really believe that, you'd resource it, wouldn't you? You'd resource the hell out of it.
That's with asking the questions, isn't it? And you know, you've said, you know, actually having workshops, and you know, I think that process is really important about actively engaging people and asking opinions and what makes a difference and what gets in the way. And you know, I do that around kind of the culture and engagement and experience at work in terms of them being able to engage with their work, perform well, and get on with their colleagues and so on. You're doing that from a physical point of view, but you're still engaging them in that process.
You're absolutely right. I mean, the outcome is, as I said, we're lucky we have this tangible outcome of a physical built environment. But do you know, I think certainly in the last 3 years, certainly since post-COVID, where we've had a chance to re-engage with clients, and you know, they've come back to us going, oh God, how do I get people back to my office? And then more importantly, they're going, actually, what's my office for? That's when it got really interesting. But actually, the you know, our ability, the workshops are for them as much as us. You know, that's certainly how we find the information out. But it's a two-way process. You know, we don't just, you know, again, I've got lots of these little phrases. You know, we don't just turn up with our designs and go, da-da, there we go, rabbit out the hat. Aren't we clever? Look at that, isn't it wonderful? Yeah, I'd like to think there is that sort of, you know, magician component to our company character, as it were. But the reality is, we want people to understand what it is we're saying and what they've told. This is what we've understood. You've told us, and so going back 23 years ago, where I'd say, well, you know, how many meeting rooms do you want? Where do you want them? You know, how many people have you got? You know, it was always like, how many people, how many desks? Well, that's just not the case at all now. What we say now is, tell us what your business objectives are and what challenges you're experiencing getting those met now. And so, whilst a good proportion of our people are qualified designers, and here it's important to make the distinction between an interior designer and a workplace designer. So a workplace designer has particular skills and experience of how people function in a space rather than just the space itself. But then also the workplace consultancy bit, which now prefaces literally every project we do. We're at a scale now where it would be hard for us to engage with a client and just deliver something without any sort of consultancy process at the front end. But that's for the client's benefit as much as ours. That's the bit that we get congratulated on and thanked for.
Let's pick up, Rob, on the human.
Okay.
You've mentioned that term a few times. You and I are very familiar with it. Some people will have absolutely no idea about human givens. So, tell us what your understanding is of the human givens in terms of kind of how and I'm going to add to it.
You are the expert. There's no question. I mean, hence the reason we've made so much contact with the Human Givens Institute College and so many other practitioners, but yourself particularly. I think that's a good question. I'll explain it how I explain it to people that I meet, because it is so important. It's an organizing framework, but it has a very simple fundamental proposition, and this is the bit I love. And here, again, I'm going to reveal a weakness in my knowledge here. So basically, I understand Human Givens says that all living organisms come into this world with an innate set of needs. But the good news is we have an innate guidance system built in to get those needs met. And I offer a couple of examples at this point. I say, so consider a sunflower, fairly simple living organism. Plant the seed in the soil, nutrition, water, sunlight. It can do no other than grow into a healthy sunflower, unless, of course, there's some genetic malfunction or toxic environmental condition. Okay, let's talk about human beings then. So very much more complicated than the sunflower, most of us anyway. And the key difference is we have an advanced thinking brain, okay, that now allows us to visualize, to plan, and importantly, to physically move around our environment.
I think the relevance of, I trained in the human givens approach to psychotherapy when I became a psychotherapist 13, 14 years ago. But actually, the key principles underpin pretty much all of my work now, because in terms of it being relevant to the workplace, it's all the stuff that people are now talking about day in, day out, particularly since the pandemic. So that sense of meaning and purpose, that sense of control, that sense of connection. And when we have our needs met well enough, we're able to thrive. But actually, we saw it hugely when people were stuck at home and they were feeling very isolated. And actually, interestingly, I work with a lot of leaders now who confess that they still feel very isolated, even if they're in the office, even if they have a team of people around them, because of their role, they feel very isolated. So I think that whole, and I think the whole, in terms of physical workspace, lots of, you've talked about open plan offices, whereas people's ability to get privacy when they need privacy. And that privacy is not just about having confidential conversations, it's about I need some headspace where I'm not being distracted by everything else going on around me. And of course, for neurodiverse people, who have, people who have particular needs around, actually, I can't work when it's really quiet, or I can't work when it's really noisy, or I can't work when. And I guess we have to factor that in as well. So for me, the emotional, the human givens needs, emotional needs are fundamental in terms of how we operate and how we are in terms of our role, in terms of our relationships, and just in terms of everything in our lives. And what I'll actually do is put a link to the human givens emotional needs audit in the show notes, that people can just start to get a look at kind of how extensive they are and how we can begin to assess how well they're being met. And you can think about that in your personal life, you can think about that specific workplaces. And I think there's a huge power of doing that in a workplace when I've got teams together to look at, okay, so how much of a sense of control do you have as a team and as individuals within that team? And, how much your sense of status, actually, do you have a sense of status at work? How is that recognized? Is that all about your salary or your role, or is it about something else, that sense of recognition? And how could we do that better? So again, it goes back to, how do I feel about my emotional needs being met at work at the moment, which ties in with the physical space, the mental space, and everything else. And actually, what could happen differently so that my needs are better met? And when they're better met, I'm able to thrive better.
Absolutely. Yeah, so true. I mean, it also brings in that bigger question about this reduction in the institution approach that businesses take to their physical spaces and indeed their culture. So I was just thinking, actually, that you could argue that there are a couple of different types of workplace that we would all recognize. There's the one where nobody really cares anyway. It's just, we've got 6 more people, order 6 desks from the local station, there's 6 chairs, and you chuck them in. And there's the kind of laissez-faire. It's just, I know, well, that's what offices look like. That's the one I grew up in, so this is what we'll have. Then there's the one that thinks it's great and that actually is undermining or disenfranchising so many people. It's interesting. You talk about people with neurodiversity, which is, it's just a better recognized subject, but similar, I suppose, arguably with autism as well. It seems a phrase, oh yeah, I know what that means. Well, actually, we're probably all on the autistic spectrum at some point. It's a spectrum. We're all on it somewhere. And more importantly, I think the thing we recognize with the subtlety of our mental and emotional needs, as you understand the principles better and you see what goes on in the real world, you understand that actually our needs change constantly. Through the course of the day. There are times at which we are happy to be social and have a chat and be distracted and, just take a break. And there are times when we desperately need privacy or some sense of control or some reinforcement of a value that you've been told that is good, but you haven't quite got yet, or you appear not to be conforming to. It's as much about culture and behavior as it is about the built environment. We interestingly, we did a white paper quite recently on the impact of COVID and what people thought the issues were in the workplace. Do you know what? I reckon the built environment's probably about a third of the overall impact. If we create a great space, if we create a space that's designed meaningfully with intent, and genuinely answers the needs of those individuals and indeed the team and structures. But the culture of the business, the culture of the organization doesn't permit it to be used or permit healthy behaviors and healthy thinking, it'll be defeated. It won't work. It's never black and white, but the idea of giving yourself a great office and solve all your problems, no, it's not true. It's vital.
Yeah.
If you really want to optimize your business and your people's chance of success, you will do everything you can. You'll remove that obstacle, that set of obstacles, that rope ladder, that muddy ditch. You'll remove all those metaphorical obstacles to give people the best that you can. But if
I think the adverse conditions.
I don't know why they're doing it.
I think the adverse conditions is really interesting because, I mean, gosh, I see when I'm wearing my psychotherapy hat one day a week, I see a huge number of people who just are extraordinary in terms of how they function with so many things against them. And I think in the workplace, people do get on and they are able to function. And sometimes, that little bit of additional stress at a particular moment of a pressure, like a deadline or something, can really accelerate people and can really give people that level of energy and that buzz, but it's not sustainable. And I think that's when people end up potentially burning out because they're just not in an environment that actually is about kind of, helping them. I talk about sort of feeding yourself in terms of actually nourishment and I think your point about having permission is so important, and it's all very well kind of creating the space, but actually if you know that going over to use an area over here or to go and enjoy that particular provision over there is going to get frowned upon because you should really be sitting at your desk, it's not going to make any difference. And for me, it very much mirrors all the stuff in the workplaces around mental health and well-being when they're adding on all these different initiatives and actually the underlying culture is not supporting it. So you might have this take a lunch break, but by the way, when you come back in, your boss is really mean to you, or your colleagues don't get on with each other, or you don't know what your job's about, and it's all the kind of fundamental stuff which is so important.
It really is. It's interesting. I mean, you use stress. I mean, we think of stress as it's pejorative, isn't it? We think of stress as a bad thing. Well, we know that stress is actually a good thing. Exercise and stressing our bodies, is fundamental to being healthy, isn't it? You can't maintain and grow your physical health without exercise and pushing yourself. And
you know what? I tend to use the word stretch. So when we're talking about, because I think for me, stress is so, it's used a lot, and it's used a lot in very unhelpful circumstances to normalize and to accept people living, working with unreasonable levels of stress. So it's become this acceptance that, well, of course you're going to be stressed at work, because if you're not stressed, you're not working hard enough, which for me, I kind of distinguish between actually being stretched is when you have that sense of meaning, that drive, that purpose, you're achieving stuff, you are, you're moving forward. But actually stress, and yes, there are, we can break down stress, but and actually what I'll do is put a link to some other resources around stress to help people break that down a bit. So Rob, tell me about a project where you have connected the kind of, it's been successful in terms of how you connected ergonomic design and workplace culture, and it's had a significant impact, positive impact on employee well-being.
Well, it's a very significant project for us. It was a very large scale project, a couple of £1 million in value, and it took 6 months to deliver. And it was very meaningful for the client as well, in terms of the budget, but it was meaningful for the client because they were also, and still are, undertaking a massive IT project to essentially redevelop their fundamental operating systems, Melton Mowbray Building Society. And they also physically moved out of the space and didn't have a home other than some small scale rented spaces. So that was quite a challenge for them. And it was significant for a number of reasons, not least of which, though, because of I think for us and them, I'm so proud of it because it was a genuine win-win, which is one of our core values. So it was a wholesale refurbishment of a 20,000 square foot building. One of the funny moments there was when we first went to look at the place. Over 3 floors, you couldn't see more than 10 feet in any one direction because it's just an office wall in the way. It was so compartmentalized over 3 floors. So there were people who would be on the same floor at the same time and never see each other from week to week or month to month. And it was, the society will say themselves quite clearly that they were in a comfortable place, not particularly growing, not particularly changing things. And the built environment was certainly making sure that was the case. It made sure that happened. And doing that all the way through the project was phenomenally refreshing, and it was because it was such a big scale and it was so important to that particular client. It was important to us as well. It was a very big project for us at the time. But it made it all the more rewarding. And especially as we've continued that relationship as they moved in, and we did put lots of stuff in place to help the initial move or the preview stages that they put in place, then the physical moves themselves, and then the evolution as the new systems start coming online. So that's been really powerful. So there were some examples, some specific examples around removing physical walls, about creating meeting rooms that were accessible to all, about actually not having to have meeting rooms necessarily, that not all meetings are confidential, that most of it's about us providing visual and acoustic privacy, which previously they had either too much of it or none at all. So they're in open plan desks or locked away in an enclosed cellular space. So the breaking down of boundaries there, we even actually ended up, whilst budget did become an issue, but they wanted to punch a hole between the second and first floors, because having visited our own space at Ashby, Work Life Central, they'd seen the value of creating open visual direct lines between floors, in fact. And so that became a very significant component of the project and a prize they were prepared to pay for. The development of branding was really interesting as well. So they rebranded at the same time, but you won't find this sort of overt expression of strict corporate colors and patterns and graphics. It's done very much more on a human scale. This is a phrase I use. There's a manufacturer in our industry called Human Scale, and they do mostly accessories for workstations. Brilliant name. I wish they hadn't registered it, because I would have done. But everything we did in the Melton was about reducing the institutionalized feel of the previous place and creating opportunities for human beings to function as human beings. And they had listened carefully to our exposition of the values of human givens, the framework of human givens. And also, we're very keen to work with them to continue to try and implement the WELL standard. So this is a standard which produced by the International Wellbeing Institute. And essentially, going back to my earliest comments, it's what good looks like effectively, because it's 10 separate areas of measurement that are thoroughly researched, really clearly defined, peer reviewed, independently assessed. And quite frankly, when I first came across the WELL standard, I went, that's the human givens, answered literally in detail. So we actively encourage our clients to pursue that, to get registration and accreditation on a project. But its purpose is to ensure the WELL standard says we're different from things like LEED and BREEAM, which concern themselves with environmental and sustainable components only in construction and design. Although, yes, those are important, and indeed they form part of the WELL standard. But actually, the WELL standard can be summarized as being a standard that ensures that these built environments are fit for the people using them.
It's really good to hear, Rob, because it is that sense of doing something, but knowing that it's had an impact, and it's not just looks like a nice space, but is actually impacting on how people are feeling and how people are performing.
Yeah, so clear branding, but branding that people can relate to, that they feel that they can adopt as their own. Things like specific ideas, supporting behaviours that we know are fundamentally important, like making sure there's good acoustic control. So that the classic, in an open plan office, you've got somebody 3 feet to your left of you, 3 feet to the right of you, and 3 feet to the front and 10 feet to the back. It's impossible to concentrate for most people. So it's about creating that level of choice control around the activities that your companies put in place to try and achieve their objectives. So that's really what it's about.
That's good advice. And what I'd be interested, I'm just aware of time, and actually I think to bring this conversation to a close, and I want to actually finish with you telling us about the event in February. But before we do that, what would be your sort of key recommendations for businesses, and anyone listening to this to think, actually, I do need to go away and I do need to think about the physical environment? What would be your advice? And actually, I'm wondering whether any of that advice might also touch on any thinking about people who are working from home, potentially.
Yeah.
That could be a whole another conversation. But yes, what's recommendations?
So think about it in context, first of all. So the built environment is but one component of our human existence. And as I've already, I believe, demonstrated, it can be a very positive or a very negative effect, and pretty much everywhere on the scale in between. It can be generally fantastic, and then there can be something that really affects what you do or prevents you from doing something that was either, we could have anticipated that, or do you know what, that's a new one, we'll have to address that again. So understanding it all in context. The built environment only works in the context of a clear statement of cultural intent and the clear resourcing of that as well. It's a leadership thing. If you are the leader, if it's your decision to think about the space that your people work in, you'll be a leader in your business, and your job is to visualize what good looks like, and people like us can help you do that, and people like you can help explain why that is the case. That's why we're working together. So visualizing it, communicating it, and as I say, for me, the success of the Melton was actually, I could sum it up as our participation with the client in communicating it to the chief exec and the decision making team, but throughout the organization, before, during, and afterwards. It was the communication of the leadership's vision. And our joint vision to create a space that would work really well, and then executing it really well, executing it perfectly as far as possible. So understand that it's only one aspect of it, but it is vital. Understand what your people really need as human beings, and imagine them doing it for the fun of it, rather than having to be paid for it. Is I always ask people that one. Say, imagine if they were doing it like with the enthusiasm they throw themselves into on their hobbies. Yeah.
And that's so important.
Imagine.
I was, it reminds me of a client I was talking with at the end of last year, who was asking about a particular project in their company, and they said, "Oh, this is what we're thinking." And I heard what they said, which is kind of what most people would say, because it's the normal reaction to a widely experienced challenge, and it goes back to, this is what we do because we've always done it. And I just looked at them and I said to them, does that excite you? Do you feel really enthusiastic about that particular way of approaching this challenge? And they both looked at me and went, no. And it's like, well, scrap it. Because if you're the ones who are thinking about this change needs to happen and you're not excited, imagine the hard work of trying to get everyone else on board. So just go about it in a completely fresh way, which is, what is it you want to get from this? And it goes back to the questions you've asked: what does good look like, and so on. And actually start with why we're doing this. And it goes back to the start of this conversation about asking the right questions and addressing what the purpose of this particular project, this particular development is about. And then you can start to create something that's really bespoke, it's really meaningful to the people involved. And then that the results are going to work because it fits around them specifically.
Yeah, so I just add one thing lastly. I think I mentioned before this idea of lots of prospective clients approaching us now with the question, what's my office for? That's where to start. If you start asking what your office is for, it's not accommodation for employees at desks. It's somewhere for your people to come, to collect together and to work together and collaborate and build a culture that will deliver your business results. So that's the kind of last one.
I think that's a really good point, Rob, actually. Because I think a lot of people are now questioning what's the office, and
we'll get rid of it. We'll get rid of the office.
Yes.
Don't get rid of the supermarkets, yeah. Don't make people come in on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays and tell them they've got to have Mondays and Fridays off. Why would you do that? That's as institutional as being there 9 till 5, 5 days a week, or telling them they've got to work from home forever.
Anyway, we're not going to go on to that topic, Rob, because I know you could talk for another hour about that, and we've got to come to an end. So tell us about the event in February.
Okay, so we were very excited, first of all, to go to a preview of the Leicestershire Innovation Festival, which will take place for 2 weeks in February this year. And we went along and listened to the local LEP and a couple of local business leaders. So I was fascinated to hear about the various awards that were going to be given for innovation. I suppose, like most people, my first thought was, oh, that'll be technology then. Leicester's got some great industries in food technology, space technology, bio, and so on. We've got lots and lots of very high-tech businesses in Leicestershire and the wider East Midlands. Somebody pointed out, as a solicitor's partner at the solicitors pointed out, actually, it's not just innovation in technology, it's innovation in all sorts of areas. And I thought, yeah, I keep trying to describe what it is that we do so differently, better and better every time I think about it. And I was going, do you know what? That's it. Actually, I'm really excited here because we really do approach thinking about the workplace, thinking about work, thinking about people very differently. In fact, I believe we're the only business in our sector that thinks about people first rather than the company and the corporate side of it. So I very excitedly sent an email off to our creative director and head of workplace that evening. And she went, I bet you've missed the email last week that came in when you were off for a couple of days. I went, yeah, I did. She went, to Montfort University, visited our place at Work Life Central in Ashby in the summer. And they loved it. It's a fabulous physical space. It's very different, very impressive. And it creates all those nice feelings and sense of intrigue and curiosity. So they loved all that, but actually they really loved the psychology behind it when it was explained to them what was informing our ideas and how we implemented and practiced our profession. And they are headline sponsors at the Innovation Festival, and they asked us if we would like to participate in an event and essentially work closely with them on an event. So really excited. It's come together very quickly, but we are engaging with Montfort University's Faculty of Psychology and Arts and Design, and particularly the interior design. And the way it's going to be structured is I'm going to chair a panel which includes myself and my colleague Chloe from our own business, who's our head of workplace, Kris Newman from Steelcase, who are a major partner. They're a huge global manufacturer of workplace products, but spend a fortune on research and development and give us some amazing insights into product development and research generally. Representatives from the Montfort University faculties of psychology and art and design, and of course yourself, Lisa. So it's going to be a really great discussion talking about what the issues are, what the dynamics are in designing the workplace of tomorrow. Can't wait for it to happen. It's going to be on February the 12th. Details will be provided, I guess. You're going to put on the end of this.
We'll put the links in the show notes so that people can find out more about it and they can book. Yeah. And I think that the real coming along to that will be getting to hear from yourselves, Steelcase, academia.
It is. We've tried to cover all the bases, and I think that discussion between those interested parties, and we're already arguably working together in any case to gain a better understanding and to gain these insights. As I say, we have a competitive advantage, I believe, as a company at Blueprint, but in the long term, we want to get the story out there and touch and affect as many businesses and people as we can. And working with great partners has historically always been a very successful way for us. It's important to say that this event is in person only. You've got to register online, but it's in person only. It's not the sort of event that you're going to really be able to get full benefit from in a Teams or a Zoom call. You need to be there to witness the discussion and to participate as well. Can't wait to hear some of the questions. There's always some great questions, and always, for me, I never do anything like this without coming away with some new and fresh insight. Like talking to you today, it's been really good.
I have loved talking to you, Rob. Honestly, we could talk for hours, and I know that you have got so much to say. So thank you so very much for your time.
Cheers, Lisa.
What have you taken from the conversation today? Please do think about your intention to do something differently. And do give the podcast a thumbs up on Apple or wherever you listen to your podcasts. I'd be incredibly grateful if you could leave a short review too, as it helps spread the word far and wide. I'd love you to join the club to be part of driving real change that improves practice and people's experience at work. You'll be the first to hear about relevant updates and free downloadable resources. Please do reach out to me directly to discuss the topics we've covered on this podcast, or perhaps other challenges at work. And if we're not already acquainted on LinkedIn, please do connect. All the links you need are in the show notes. Thanks again, and see you in a fortnight.